Hey guys, Lewis here, and today I just want to make a short video about language learning hacks for busy people trying to learn languages. So there are mainly two categories of things, two main strategies that I want to talk about. And number one is modifying the scope of the things that you need to do to become fluent. That's number one. And number two is using passive methods in order to increase the time that you spend learning a language without having to actively just, sit down and, you don't have much time. So you need to use some other times when you can do some passive learning. So, I've been learning multiple languages during the past, several years. So English being one, my native language is French. I've been learning Japanese as well. I can have fluent conversations in Japanese, and I'm pretty busy as well. I mean, I'm just as busy as you probably. I do have a full-time job. I'm doing this, YouTube thing on the side, and here's the thing is that I'm guessing that a lot of people watching my videos, they're in their 30s and 40s and maybe more, and maybe you have kids plus a full-time job, so that's, you're pretty busy, and so you don't have a lot of time. Well, it is still possible to get great results for, when learning a language, even if you don't have a lot of time, but you need to have, better strategies and sort of plan the tactics that you're going to use. All right, so the first thing is reducing the scope of the things that you need to do to become fluent. So what I really mean by this is I think there are two main components here in this strategy. Number one, you need to really understand what the vocabulary that you need to learn is. So instead of just learning a general vocabulary, you need to target high frequency vocabulary. So the first probably 2,000 or the first 3,000 like most common words in the languages you're trying to learn, you definitely need to learn them. And then you need to learn vocabulary in the specific subject areas where you're going to use the language. And this is different from person to person. So maybe you need the language to learn about, I don't know, cooking, or to talk about politics, then you need to target this. All right, let me talk about high frequency vocabulary first. So I've talked with multiple professors, researchers in the domain of vocabulary learning. As a matter of fact, I've talked with the three biggest, like most cited researchers in this field, Professor Paul Nation, Dr. Norbert Schmidt, and Dr. Batya Laufer. These three people are kind of like the holy trinity of vocabulary research. They have the most citations. Everyone in the field knows these names. I mean, that's it. And so what they agree on is that number one, you need to know the high frequency vocabulary. So when you're learning a language, there is, obviously there are words that are going to come up a lot more often than others. So for example, in English, the word the, T-H-E, is going to appear a lot. The word apple is going to appear a lot less. And so you see, you can sort of do this like a frequency list of words in whatever language you're trying to learn. And this is what I've done, by the way, with the Anki chord decks, which are flashcard packages for vocabulary that you can find at ankichorddex.com. I'll just put the link in the description. But the point is, if you learn these high frequency words, 2,000, 3,000 most common words at least, then the return on your time that you're getting there is huge. So if you're busy, if you only have, let's say, I doubt that most people have even 1 hour a day to dedicate to this. So if you have 30 minutes, if you have 15 minutes, I highly recommend that you start by taking a look at the high frequency vocabulary. So the first, let's say, 2,000 words. You're not going to regret this. When I did this for Japanese, I saw almost instantaneous results. When I was having conversations with Japanese speakers, dozens of times during those conversations, I just thought, oh, this is a word that I learned just today. And, this is such an efficient technique. All right, so the second thing, with vocabulary is that you need to learn targeted vocabulary. I talked about this with Dr. Barry Lee Reynolds, a professor and researcher at the University of Macau. So it's good to learn, general purpose, high frequency vocabulary, but you're going to reach a point where, in the frequency lists, it's going to get a little bit more specific depending on what material the frequency lists are based on. And so a good solution here, if you're really busy, is to say, okay, here are the subject areas where I really need to know the words, right? So it can be cooking, it can be finance, it can be, I don't know, comic books and whatever. Learn this vocabulary, and because for you, this is going to be high frequency vocabulary. So the return on your time is going to be very high. And so, I keep talking about this idea of return on your time, because if you're busy, you really need to think about the low hanging fruit as opposed to, just doing general language learning. All right, so this is vocabulary. This is the first part, just really limiting the scope of vocabulary that you need. And by the way, I realize that in a lot of my videos, I talk a lot about vocabulary because, and I talked about this with Dr. Norbert Schmidt, the second most cited researcher in the domain of vocabulary. When you learn a language, for the most part, there is grammar, there is vocabulary, and there is, the sounds of the language. So, pronunciation and all this. The most important and the biggest hurdle is going to be vocabulary. Why is this? Well, because vocabulary, there are thousands of words that you need to know to even be functional in the language. Whereas grammar and pronunciation and, the sounds of the language, these are much more limited in scope. So for you as a busy person, vocabulary is very important, and you need to make sure that you're limiting the scope of what you're learning by learning high frequency vocabulary plus targeted vocabulary. All right, so in terms of reducing the scope even further, and this is important, if you're learning a language where the writing system is hard, like I'm learning Japanese, this is really hard. Chinese, really hard as well. I'm guessing that there are other languages where the writing system is hard. I don't know exactly which ones. If you're learning the language just for, the goal is just to talk with people, have conversations, you really need to ask yourself, do I really want to learn the writing system? And this is just an example here. All I'm saying is that depending on your goals, you need to think about which skills do I need to work on the most. For me, I want to have conversations with Japanese people. I do not need to learn the writing system. And I was a bit worried that, when I started learning Japanese, well, if I'm not learning the writing system, am I leaving something on the table that maybe, I'm not learning the writing system, so my conversational skills, are they going to suffer from this? I asked this very question to Professor Paul Nation, and he said, yeah, well, sure, but it doesn't have a big impact. And, I'm the proof of this. I don't know how to read Japanese, or I can read, very basic Japanese, but I can have fluent conversations in most subject areas. All right, so if your goal is to talk with people, I would encourage you to really think about, well, do I need to learn the writing system? In my opinion, you can leave this, on the side, put this on the back burner. You don't need to learn it. If you just learn conversational skills, speaking and listening comprehension, and if, at some point in the future, you want to learn the writing system and learn to write and to read better, then you have a huge advantage. So, you're not wasting any time. All right, so now let me get to the second strategy, because for now I've only been talking about reducing the scope of the things that you have to learn to be fluent. But the second thing is using your passive time for learning languages. So, there's this concept in language learning, YouTube at least, which is called immersion, which is that, when you're when you're commuting, or when you are working out, when you're cleaning the house, when you're doing the dishes, then you can just have headphones on and listen to something in the target language that you're learning. So I'm commuting, I'm listening to something in Japanese, like a podcast, or I don't know, a video or something. This is a good strategy, right? This is a good strategy. Now, I would encourage you to think about this again in terms of it needs to be more targeted, right? Because if you're just listening to general, things like podcasts and videos and stuff, great. But if you can even do this, like you listen to podcasts about a specific topic where you're interested in learning the vocabulary, learning, all the terms, then that is even better. Now, this is not the only thing that you can do. The podcasts and videos, these things are great, but you can actually do certain, intentional learning activities while you're in the car, while you're commuting, and so on. So one thing that I've been doing, and I found this incredibly useful, this is a very powerful method for learning how to speak and learning vocabulary as well, is that what you can do is, this is called rehearsed speeches. I think I've talked about this in the past in a video, but this is an activity that is a suggested activity in one of Paul Nation's book. Just a reminder that Professor Paul Nation is the most cited person in the field of vocabulary research. So this is a science-based method for learning how to speak. What you do is that you create a speech. So what I do is I kind of use AI. I've built my own piece of software for this. This is not for sales or anything. I'm just going to tell you how you can do this on your own. But you go to ChatGPT, for example, and you tell it, okay, generate a speech about, I don't know, like the history of France or something like that, right? And it's going to generate a speech here, and you tell it, okay, generate also the translation. So you have to generate it in French because I'm learning French or whatever, and then generate the translation in English, all right, just to help me to understand the text. Now, you learn this speech the first time, right? You have to sit down and actually learn it. You learn it, just memorize it. And then, in the next few days, what you do is that when you're in the car, when you're cleaning the house, then you try to actually speak the speech and try to remember it and recite it. Now, I know there's this whole thing on the internet about rote memorization for language learning. This is a sin, right? You need to acquire the language. You shouldn't learn it. All I'm telling you here is that this activity was a suggested activity in Professor Paul Nation's book, who is one of the biggest names in this language learning research thing. And my own experience is that this has been hugely useful in just learning entire speeches. It's not like you're going to use the speeches when you're talking with a person. You're not just going to recite them, right? But you have the sentences in your mind, you have the words in your mind. This really makes for long-lasting memories of these lexical items. Very, very useful. And you can use your commute time, you can use time when you're not doing anything with your mind to actually recite these speeches and further just strengthen the memory of these speeches in your mind. So these are the two strategies. Again, we try to reduce the scope of the things that we have to learn, and number two, we try to use passive strategies, or not necessarily passive, but use our passive time to learn, to do activities to learn languages. If you're busy, these are really the best hacks that I can give you to learn languages. Now, if you're interested in more science-based ways of learning languages, then I encourage you to take a look at my interview with Professor Paul Nation. I'm going to put it on the screen here, or I'll put a link to it in the description. I also have the Anki Core decks, which are frequency lists. They're flashcard packages that work with the free piece of software software called Anki. I'll put a link to this in the description if you're interested, and I'll see you next time.